And then the way, as I stated earlier, the way they were hidden, the way their clothing was hidden, the bicycles thrown into the bayou. I believe the subject came from that particular neighborhood, and that's where, if this was back in 1993, I'd be steering them in that direction. And of course, parents are always considered suspects, first suspects you'll look at in cases like these.
Mr. Douglas, have you ever seen a case similar to this?
No, I've never seen a case. I've done thousands of cases, and my colleague, when I left the bureau, we were doing 1,000 a year. I didn't see any case like it, and particularly with teenagers. It just showed a higher level of criminal sophistication for teenagers to do something like that. Certainly, we've had teenagers involved in killings, a lot of school shootings, but never to never like like this at all. And on a side note too, when I've seen cases, when I've dealt with multiple subjects, and you're offering multiple subjects in cases deals to testify against somebody else, and they're not even going to do it. I thought that was quite surprising too, relative to their innocence. They wouldn't even testify against their fellow colleagues. They took the time, which was really unusual.
What likelihood of hairs being transferred from a body? Maybe I go into the woods and I have the hair on my body, and it's transferred to a ligature like that. What's the possibility of that? That's what Mr. Hobbs says to us possibly happened, and the reason that his hair appeared on the crime scene.
It's possible that someone other than Mr. Hobbs delivered his hair, if it is his hair, to the scene. In the same way that it must be possible that Mr. Hobbs, if it was him, transferred David Jacoby's hair to the scene. Hairs that are acquired from somebody else that we don't grow ourselves simply adhere by static electricity to our clothing, and they fall off from time to time. Things can speed up the transfer of hairs. Things can slow down the transfer of hairs. Activity speeds it up. Inactivity slows it down, that sort of thing.
So would it be unusual attending a parent?
Well, it's possible that his stepson legitimately carried Terry Hobbs's hair to that scene. It's certainly possible. It need not require Mr. Hobbs to be present, although on the other hand, it is possible that Mr. Hobbs and not his stepson brought that hair to the scene. There really isn't any way to be sure.
Again, in terms of our case, anyone who posits a theory, innocent ways that innocent people could have left evidence at the crime scene, has to deal with the fact that if that's the case, if things are left that easily and there, how could three unsophisticated teenagers brutally murder three boys and not leave evidence? And remember, we're talking a foreign allele, which is a genetic element, on the penis of Stephen Branch. Yeah.
My understanding is in 1993, the medical examiner said Myers bled to death. How do you explain that? Are you saying the medical examiner was wrong?
Forensic pathologist.
Yes, I think the medical examiner was wrong. I think they're all drowned. The injury in the groin area was almost bloodless, or was bloodless for all intents and purposes, and showed ripping, chewing by a predator animal, a carnivorous animal, a large animal, with evidence that this did not occur during the life of the boy. So they could not have been bleeding from that source.
We have a question there.
Just curious why it's taken 15 years to get to the point where you guys are at right now, and why it took so long to draw these conclusions as to, and to be able to actually file this paperwork in a federal court. Why did it take 15 years to get to this point?
The simplest answer to that is that there was very, very little interest in providing to three indigent kids who lived in trailer parks the resources to defend themselves in this case. It is alleged in our petition in federal court, for instance, that trial counsel was ineffective in the constitutional sense, enough to overturn a conviction, for not retaining a pathologist. No pathologist. The police arrived at that scene, declared this to be a genital mutilation. They're not pathologists. And there was going to be no questioning of that from that point on by the state's pathologist, and there was no defense pathologist who had been retained to combat these results. Now, DNA, of course, the reason that we can do the DNA is it didn't exist at the time, and Arkansas has authorized this because the technology has come into existence then. But this is a case in which the defense investigator was eventually paid $1 an hour by the state of Arkansas for his efforts on behalf of Damien Echols. This is what happens when you don't need pathologists, because everybody knows, as Gary Gitchell did, exactly what happened in this crime from day one.
With that being said, let me ask, do you feel that the state has been working against what the defense has been trying to do by exonerating him and freeing him of these charges? Do you feel like in the last few years, as you've tried to proceed with your case, that they've been working against you as much as you feel they did during the trial proceedings?
Well, Don and I came in 2004, and the reason for that is that the state proceedings ended then, and people associated with Damien Echols' defense said, we need someone who knows the ins and outs of federal habeas corpus, which is an incredibly arcane area. When we talked to Brent Davis with members of the Attorney General's office on Monday, Brent, of course, is very, very familiar with the evidence, but when you get into talking about EDPA and time limits and successive petitions and procedural bars, you know, very few criminal lawyers deal with that. So it's at that point that we came into it. And all I can say is that since our entry into this case, Brent Davis has, I don't think he has maintained and continues to maintain, perhaps someday we'll persuade him, that these convictions are valid, but he certainly has engaged in a cooperative effort around things like DNA testing, certainly has made available the state's forensic pathologists for the meetings that we've talked about. So we absolutely feel that he has certainly has his viewpoint on it, but has proceeded in a completely professional way in terms of the proceedings that we're now involved in state and federal court. Well, I'll tell you what I know about that. What I know about that is that Lori Davis, the wife of Damien Echols, contacted us in 2003 and said, you know, we've been told you guys know federal habeas corpus. Will you get involved in this case? And we said, we're lawyers in San Francisco. It requires, you're unhappy with the level of investigation and factual investigation, so you need that on the ground in Arkansas. How can we possibly do this? And she has said, work on the case, and I will find a way to raise funds. And all we know is that every now and then we contact her and say, Lori, we haven't heard from you in a while, and she says, I'll get to work on this. I think you're aware that there's an enormous amount of interest in this on the internet and so forth. I know that she makes pleas there. I don't think it's a secret that when we got into the case, that, well, the DNA testing, the reason we got the DNA testing here, there's a statutory right to it. But generally the state will often fight a defendant because it costs a lot of money. And the agreement was reached. The defense has funded all of this. The DNA testing has cost the state nothing, which is, it's usually the state that provides this to indigent defendants. Now, I don't think it's a secret that people like Eddie Vedder have done concerts and raised a lot of money to pay for that DNA testing.